When you hear about a hurricane brewing out there, it's one thing, but when you're in Florida and you've just gone through a storm like Helene, well, let's just say the thought of another one spinning out there kind of hits you differently. So today, we're doing a deep dive into Tropical Storm Milton. And, what's got folks really on edge isn't just the fact that it could become a major hurricane, but it's taking a path we hardly ever see.
Yeah, no, I think that's a valid concern. And, Milton's development, it's been really unusual. I mean, it went from a tropical depression to a tropical storm almost overnight.
It did.
And that alone, that gets our attention. But the thing is, it could become a serious hurricane much faster than we're used to seeing.
Right. And to make matters even more, well, let's just say interesting, we're talking about a storm that started way down in the Bay of Campeche. That's got to have you looking twice, right?
Absolutely.
Right.
That is not your typical path for a storm that even comes close to Florida.
Right.
I mean, think about it. You usually see hurricanes curving up along the Atlantic, or they come at us from the Caribbean. But the Bay of Campeche that's tucked away over in the western Gulf of Mexico, and usually those storms, they get steered westward right out there into the open ocean, because that's just kind of how the winds blow.
Okay, so what on earth is pushing Milton our way then?
Well, that is the question, isn't it? It seems like we've got some unusual stuff happening up in the atmosphere right now. There's this big area of high pressure hanging out over the Atlantic, and the winds that usually steer these storms, they're weaker than normal. Yeah. And so that could be a big part of why Milton is taking this, well, atypical path, let's call it.
Right.
And what makes it even more nerve-wracking is that Florida is still recovering from Hurricane Helene.
I was just thinking about that. Not even 2 weeks ago, Helene barreled into the Panhandle, and it left a real mess behind.
Right.
Not to mention, it sadly cost some people their lives, and some parts of Pinellas County are still trying to pick up the pieces.
Exactly. And now here comes Milton with the potential to cause even more problems. And I think that's why 51 counties are under a state of emergency. I mean, Governor DeSantis, he's not taking any chances.
51 counties, that's a huge chunk of the state.
It is, yeah.
I can only imagine that having Helene so recently is weighing heavily on everyone.
It has to be. Can you imagine dealing with all the flooding and damage from one storm and then boom, another one's on your doorstep just days later?
Oh, man.
That's got to be incredibly stressful, right? And I think it really highlights how important it is to be prepared, like really prepared, even when you think, okay, we're past the worst of it.
Absolutely. So let's dive into what this storm might have in store for us. The projections show a possible path towards Florida's west coast, maybe even a run at Tampa Bay. What are the biggest worries right now?
Okay, so you've got the usual suspects with hurricanes, right?
Yeah.
You've got the strong winds, you've got the potential for heavy rain.
Right.
But Tampa Bay has to worry about storm surge. That's a major concern for them.
I can see why.
Yeah, because the way the bay is shaped is like this big funnel,
Yeah,
right?
right.
So if Milton hits at just the wrong time, when the tide is high, that water's got nowhere to go but inland. And then you're talking about those coastal areas getting swamped.
And we saw with Helene how those outer bands can drop massive amounts of rain even far inland. It's not just the coast that needs to worry about flooding.
Exactly. You're exactly right. Even if Milton loses some steam before it hits land, it's still packing a whole lot of moisture. Like right now, they're saying we could get 5 to 8 inches of rain.
Wow.
And yes, some areas might even get hit with a foot of rain.
Oh, my goodness.
And you combine that with the ground already being soaked from Helene.
Yep.
Yeah, we're talking about a recipe for some serious flooding. And that's something that folks need to be thinking about even if they're miles and miles from the coast. Because those rivers and streams, they can only handle so much water.
So this is really starting to paint a picture of what we're dealing with here. So let's switch gears a bit and talk about how strong Milton could actually get. How worried should we be?
It's the models are still kind of jumping around a bit.
Yeah.
But it's this whole idea of rapid intensification
Right.
that's really got us concerned, because you've got these really warm waters in the Gulf right now, and those warm waters, they're like rocket fuel for hurricanes.
Right.
And then on top of that, you've got what we call low wind shear. So that means the winds, they're not changing much in speed or direction as you go higher up.
Okay.
And when you've got that combination, man, that's when you can see a storm just blow up in strength.
So it's almost like everything's lining up in the worst way.
It's not ideal. I'll say that. And the thing is, rapid intensification, that's one of the trickiest things for us to get a handle on. in meteorology.
Really?
Because even a small change in those atmospheric conditions,
Mm-hmm.
it can make a huge difference in how much a storm, how much it strengthens, how quickly it strengthens.
Wow, that must be, I mean, talk about job security, all right?
You know, kidding.
That must be so frustrating for you guys trying to give folks accurate information when it's changing so quickly.
It is. It's like, it's like trying to nail Jello to a wall.
Right,
It's
right.
just, it's really hard to pin down.
Yeah,
And that's why we always tell people, look, the forecasts, they're a good guide. They give you a general idea.
yeah,
But you got to be ready for anything, really. Because we can't control the weather,
right.
but we can control how prepared we are.
You got that right. And I know you've said it before, but for our listener who's probably, maybe starting to feel a little anxious right now, what can they do? What are those must-dos, even with so much up in the air?
Okay, so first things first, don't panic.
Right.
It's really easy to get caught up in all the what ifs,
Oh, yeah.
but you got to take that energy
Yeah.
and you got to channel it into action, right? So if you haven't already, now's the time to go back, look at your hurricane plan, dust it off,
Yeah.
make sure you know how you're going to get updates, from reliable sources.
So, who are we talking about? Give us some names.
Oh, yeah, for sure. You want to look at the National Hurricane Center, your local news, your local emergency management office.
Okay, okay.
Those are going to be your best bets for getting good, solid information.
Makes sense.
And, yeah, stocking up on those supplies.
Yeah, yeah.
That's got to be high on the list, too.
What do people need? What are we talking about?
Okay, so think about it this way. What if the power goes out?
Hmm.
And it's out for a few days, maybe even a week.
Okay.
Non-perishable food,
Sure.
water, batteries, flashlights, a first aid kit. Those are the non-negotiables.
Okay, what about medicine? That's got to be something folks forget sometimes.
You're absolutely right. That is huge. Make sure you've got at least a week's worth of any prescription meds you need. And, if you've got furry friends,
Yeah,
don't forget about them either.
right.
Make sure you've got their food and any meds they might need too.
Okay, those are all really good reminders. Now, what about evacuations? Because I imagine that's got to be on people's minds, especially with, Helene still so fresh.
Oh, absolutely. And it's something you never want to mess around with, right? Like if they tell you to go,
You go.
you go. No hesitation.
Mm.
It's always better to be safe than sorry. And, if you're in an evacuation zone, it's a good idea to know where you're going to go, have that plan in place now, even before they issue an order.
Right, and that might include things like, do you have a place to stay with family or friends who are further inland?
Yeah, exactly.
What about your pets? If shelters aren't an option, do you have a plan for them?
All of those things.
Yeah.
Because if you've got those logistics figured out ahead of time, it's going to be a lot less stressful when you're in the thick of it.
Absolutely. I want to circle back for a second to something you said earlier about, all the information that's flying around. Because we live in this world where everyone's got a weather app on their phone, social media is blowing up with everybody and their brother's opinion.
Right.
How do you, as an expert, how do you cut through all that noise? How do you figure out what's real, what's accurate?
That is the million-dollar question, right?
It is.
I'll tell you, stick with those official sources we talked about. The National Hurricane Center, your local news, your county's emergency management website.
Okay.
Those guys are going to be your best bet, especially when it comes to the important stuff like evacuation orders, where the shelters are going to be.
Yeah. Makes sense.
Social media, it can be great. It can be a good way to connect with people,
Yeah.
check in.
Right.
But man, it can be a breeding ground for rumors and misinformation, especially during these kinds of events.
Yeah, no doubt.
So just be careful what you're reading. And if something sounds fishy, double check it. Don't just take it at face value.
That's good advice anytime, honestly.
Yeah, pretty much.
So it sounds like the big takeaway here is preparedness. Preparedness. Preparedness.
Yeah,
right.
100%.
Even if Milton doesn't end up being a direct hit or if it weakens, we're still talking about a situation with a lot of potential for problems. But you've listened to this, you're informed, that's the first step. And now it's time to take action. Don't wait for someone else to tell you what to do. Go do those things that are going to keep you safe and give you some peace of mind.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Now, on a slightly lighter note, you mentioned earlier about those weird atmospheric conditions that are kind of pushing Milton our way.
Yeah.
Is this just a weird hurricane season? Or is there something bigger going on here?
Well, I mean, it's not unusual to have busy hurricane season, especially here.
Right.
But I think when you look at the way Milton's track is shaping up and you see that potential for it to really gain strength quickly,
Yeah.
yeah, it kind of points to this bigger trend that we've been watching unfold for a while now.
And that trend being,
Climate change.
yeah,
I mean, it's a factor here. There's no doubt about it.
say,
Because when you've got warmer ocean temperatures, you're basically giving these hurricanes more fuel.
right,
And that means they can get stronger and they can get stronger faster.
right.
And then you throw in rising sea levels. Well, now those storm surges are even more dangerous
Yeah.
because the water's got further to go.
Right, right.
And that puts coastal communities at even greater risk.
It's a tough reality to face, for sure, especially for folks who are still dealing with, what happened with Helene. It's like every time we see a storm brewing now, there's this added layer of worry. Like, what does this mean for the future? Is this the new normal?
And it's a valid concern.
Right.
And it just reminds us that all of these issues, they're connected.
They are.
What happens on one side of the world can have a huge impact on the other side, right?
Right.
Like, look at what happened with Helene. The remnants of that storm caused all kinds of flooding up the East Coast.
It did.
And now you've got these unusual atmospheric patterns that are messing with Milton's path.
Yeah. So it's not just about getting ready for each individual storm anymore.
Right.
It's about really understanding how climate change is playing into all of this and figuring out what we can do to lessen the blow.
100%. It's about being prepared on every level. Yeah, you got to have a plan for your family, your home,
Right.
but you also have to think bigger.
Yeah.
We need policies that tackle climate change head on.
We do.
We got to build communities that are more resilient.
Right.
Because this isn't going away.
It isn't. Well said. So as we wrap up our deep dive on Tropical Storm Milton, I think the message for our listeners is this. Things are changing by the minute, and while we don't have all the answers right now, we know one thing for sure: this thing has the potential to cause some real problems. But knowledge is power, right? And you've been listening, you're informed. Now it's time to take action. Don't wait for someone to tell you what to do. Take those steps now. Be prepared, no matter what Milton throws our way.
I couldn't agree more.
Stay safe out there, everyone. And remember, we're going to be here keeping you up to date every step of the way. Until next time, take care.